This is Louis Tracy's The Silent Barrier, a work now in the public domain. Chapter 5. Interlude. Helen rose betimes next morning, but she found that the sun had kept an earlier tryst. Not a cloud marred a sky of dazzling blue. The phantom mist had gone with the shadows. From her bedroom window she could see the whole length of the Ober-Engadin, till the view was abruptly shut off by the giant shoulders of Lagrev and Rosach. The brilliance of the colouring was the landscape's most astounding feature. The lakes were plains of polished turquoise, the rocks pure greys and browns and reds, the meadows emerald green, while the shining white patches of snow on the highest mountain slopes helped to blacken by contrast the sombre clumps of pines that gathered thick wherever man had not disputed with the trees, the tenancy of each foot of meagre loam. This morning, glory of nature gladdened the girl's heart and drove from it the overnight vapours. She dressed hurriedly, made a light breakfast, and went out. There was no need to ask the way. In front of the hotel the narrow Silser See filled the valley. Close behind lay the crest of the pass. A picturesque chateau was perched on a sheer rock overhanging the vale of Bregagia and commanding a far-flung prospect almost to the brink of Como. On both sides rose the mountain barriers, but toward the east there was an inviting gorge, beyond which the lofty Cima di Rosso flung its eternal snows heavenward. A footpath led in that direction. Helen, who prided herself on her sense of locality, decided that it would bring her to the valley in which were situated, as she learned by the map, a small lake and a glacier. "It will be a fine walk before lunch," she said, "and it is quite impossible to lose the way." So she set off, crossing the hotel golf course, and making for a typical Swiss church that crowned the nearest of the foothills. Passing the church, she found the double doors in the porch open and peeped in. It was a cosy little place, cleaner and less garish than such edifices are usually on the continent. The lamp burning before the sanctuary showed that it was devoted to Roman Catholic worship. The red gleam of the tiny sentinel conveyed a curiously vivid impression of faith and spirituality. Though Helen was a Protestant, she was conscious of a benign emotion arising from the presence of this simple token of belief. "I must ascertain the hours of service," she thought. "It will be delightful to join the Swiss peasants in prayer. One might come near the Creator in this rustic tabernacle." She did not cross the threshold of the inner door. At present her mind was fixed on brisk movement in the marvellous air. She wanted to absorb the sunshine, to dispel once and for all the unpleasing picture of life in the high Alps presented by the stupid crowd she had met in the hotel overnight. Of course, she was somewhat unjust there, but women are predisposed to trust first impressions, and Helen was no exception to her sex. Beyond the church, the path was not so definite. Oddly enough, it seemed to go along the flat top of a low wall down to a tiny mountain stream. Steps were cut in the opposite hillside, but they were little used, and higher up, among some dwarf pines and azaleas, a broader way wound back toward the few scattered chalets that nestled under the chateau. As the guidebook spoke of a carriage road to Lake Cavloccio and a bridle path thence to within a mile of the Forno glacier, she came to the conclusion that she was taking a short cut. At any rate, on the summit of the next little hill, she would be able to see her way quite distinctly, so she jumped across the brook and climbed through the undergrowth. Before she had gone 20 yards, she stopped. She was almost certain that someone was sobbing bitterly up there among the trees. It had an uncanny sound, this plaint of grief in such a quiet, sunlit spot. Still, sorrow was not an affrighting thing to Helen. It might stir her sympathies, but it assuredly could not drive her away in panic. She went on, not noiselessly, as she did not wish to intrude on some stranger's misery. Soon she came to a low wall, and, before she quite realized her surroundings, she was looking into a grass-grown cemetery. It was a surprise, this ambush of the silent company among the trees. Hidden away from the outer world, and so secluded that its whereabouts remain unknown to thousands of people who visit the Maloja each summer, there was an aspect of stealth in its sudden discovery that was almost menacing. But Helen was not a nervous subject. The sobbing had ceased, and when the momentary effect of such a depressing environment had been resolutely driven off, she saw that a rusty iron gate was open. The place was very small. There were a few monuments so choked with weeds and dank grass that their inscriptions were illegible. She had never seen a more desolate graveyard. Despite the vivid light and the joyous breeze rustling the pine branches, its air of abandonment was depressing. She fought against the sensation as unworthy of her intelligence, but she had some reason for it in the fact that there was no visible explanation of the mourning she had undoubtedly heard. Then she uttered an involuntary cry, for a man's head and shoulders rose from behind a leafy shrub. Instantly she was ashamed of her fear. It was the old guide who acted as coachman the previous evening, and he had been lying face downward on the grass in that part of the cemetery given over to the unnamed dead. He recognized her at once. Struggling awkwardly to his feet, he said in broken and halting German, "I pray your forgiveness, Fräulein. I fear I have alarmed you." "It is I who should ask forgiveness," she said. "I came here by accident. I thought I could go to Cavloccio by this path." She could have hit on no other word so well calculated to bring him back to everyday life. To direct the steps of wanderers in his beloved Engadin was a real pleasure to him. For an instant he forgot that they had both spoken German. "No, no," he cried animatedly. "Verleck him go by village. Bad road dis away, no cross a field, verboten." Then Helen remembered that trespassers are sternly warned off the low-lying lands in the mountains. Grass is scarce and valuable. Until the highest pastures yield to the arid rock, pedestrians must keep to the beaten track. "I was quite mistaken," she said. "I see now that the path I was trying to reach leads here only, and I am very, very sorry I disturbed you." He hobbled nearer, the ruin of a fine man, with a nobly proportioned head and shoulders, but sadly maimed by the accident which, to all appearances, made him useless as a guide. "Pardon an old man's folly, Fräulein," he said humbly. "I thought none could hear, and I felt the loss of my little girl more than ever today." "Your daughter, is she buried here?" "Yes. Many a year has passed, but I miss her now more than ever. She was all I had in the world, Fräulein. I am alone now, and that is a hard thing when the back is bent with age." Helen's eyes grew moist, but she tried bravely to control her voice. "Was she young?" she asked softly. "Only 20, Fräulein, only 20, and as tall and fair as yourself. They carried her here 16 years ago this very day. I did not even see her. On the previous night I fell on Corvatsch." "Oh, how sad! But why did she die at that age, and in this splendid climate?" "Was her death unexpected?" "Unexpected." He turned and looked at the huge mountain of which the cemetery hill formed one of the lowermost buttresses. "If the Piz della Magna were to topple over and crush me where I stand, it would be less unforeseen than was my sweet Etta's fate. But I frighten you, lady, a poor return for your kindness. That is your way, through the village, and by the post road till you reach a notice board telling you where to take the path." There was a crude gentility in his manner that added to the pathos of his words. Helen was sure that he wished to be left alone with his memories. Yet she lingered. "Please tell me your name," she said. "I may visit St. Moritz while I remain here, and I shall try to find you." "Christian Stanker," he said. He seemed to be on the point of adding something, but checked himself. "Christian Stanker," he repeated after a pause. "Everybody knows old Stanker the guide. If I am not there, and you go to Zermatt some day, well, just ask for Stanker. They will tell you what has become of me." She found it hard to reconcile this broken, careworn old man with her cheery companion of the previous afternoon. What did he mean? She understood his queer jargon of Italianized German quite clearly, but there was a sinister ring in his words that blanched her face. She could not leave him in his present mood. She was more alarmed now than when she saw him rising ghost-like from behind the screen of grass and weeds. "Please walk with me to the village," she said. "All this beautiful land is strange to me. It will divert your thoughts from a mournful topic if you tell me something of its wonders." He looked at her for an instant. Then his eyes fell on the church in the neighbouring hollow, and he crossed himself, murmuring a few words in Italian. She guessed their meaning. He was thanking the Virgin for having sent to his rescue a girl who reminded him of his lost Etta. "Yes," he said, "I will come. If I were remaining in the Maloja, Fräulein, I would beg you to let me take you to the Forno, and perhaps to one of the peaks beyond. Old as I am, and lame, you would be safe with me." Helen breathed freely again. She felt that she had been within measurable distance of a tragedy. Nor was there any call on her wits to devise fresh means of drawing his mind away from the madness that possessed him a few minutes earlier. As he limped unevenly by her side, his talk was of the mountains. Did she intend to climb? Well, slow and sure was the golden rule. Do little or nothing during 4 or 5 days, until she had grown accustomed to the thin and keen alpine air. Then go to Lake Langino. That would suffice for the first real excursion. Next day, she ought to start early, and climb the mountain overlooking that same lake. Up there, on the other side of the hotel, all rock and not difficult. If the weather was clear, she would have a grand view of the Bernina Range. Next, she might try the Forno Glacier. It was a simple thing. She could go to and from the cabane in 10 hours. Afterward, the Cima di Rosso offered an easy climb, but that meant sleeping at the hut. All of which was excellent advice, though the reflection came that Stampa's slow and sure methods were not strongly in evidence some 16 hours earlier. Now, the Cima di Rosso was in full view at that instant. Helen stopped. "Do you really mean to tell me that if I wish to reach the top of that mountain, I must devote 2 days to it?" she cried. Stampa, though bothered with troubles beyond her ken, forgot them sufficiently to laugh grimly. "It is farther away than you seem to think, Fräulein, but the real difficulty is the ice. Unless you cross some of the crevasses in the early morning, before the sun has had time to undo the work accomplished by the night's frost, you run a great risk. And that is why you must be ready to start from the cabane at dawn. Moreover, at this time of year, you get the finest view about 6 o'clock. The mention of crevasses was somewhat awesome. "Is it necessary to be roped when one tries that climb?" she asked. "If any guide ever tells you that you need not be roped while crossing ice or climbing rock, turn back at once, Fräulein. Wait for another day, and go with a man who knows his business." That is how the Alps get a bad name for accidents. Look at me. I have climbed the Matterhorn 40 times, and the Jungfrau times out of count, and never did I or anyone in my care come to grief. "Use the rope properly," is my motto, and it has never failed me, not even when 2 out of 5 of us were struck senseless by falling stones on the south side of Monte Rosa. Helen experienced another thrill. "I very much object to falling stones," she said. Stampa threw out his hands in emphatic gesture. "What can one do?" he cried. "They are always a danger, like the snow cornice and the Neve. There is a chimney on the Jungfrau through which stones are constantly shooting from a height of 2,000 feet. You cannot see them. They travel too fast for the eye. You hear something sing past your ears, that is all. Occasionally there is a report like a gunshot, and then you observe a little cloud of dust rising from a new scar on a rock. If you are hit, well, there is no dust, because the stone goes right through. Of course, one does not loiter there." Then, seeing the scared look on her face, he went on. "Ladies should not go to such places. It is not fit. But for men, yes. There is the joy of battle. Do not err, Fräulein. The mountains are alive, and they fight to the death. They can be beaten, but there must be no mistakes. They are like strong men, the hills. When you strive against them, strain them to your breast and never relax your grip. Then they yield slowly, with many a trick and false move that a man must learn if he would look down over them all and say, 'I am Lord here.' Ah me, shall I ever again cross the Col du Lion or climb the great tower? But there, I am old and thrown aside. Boys whom I engaged as porters would refuse me now as their porter. Better to have died like my friend Michel Croz than live to be a goatherd." He seemed to pull himself up with an effort. "That way, to your left, you cannot miss the path. Adieu, signorina." And he lifted his hat with the inborn grace of the peasantry of southern Europe. Helen was hoping that he might elect to accompany her to Cavloccio. She would willingly have paid him for loss of time. Her ear was becoming better tuned each moment to his strange patois. Though he often gave a soft Italian inflection to the harsh German syllables, she grasped his meaning quite literally. She had read so much about Switzerland that she knew how Michel Croz was killed while descending the Matterhorn after having made the first ascent. That historic accident happened long before she was born. To hear a man speak of Croz as a friend sounded almost unbelievable, though a moment's thought told her that Whymper, who led the attack on the hitherto impregnable Cervin on that July day in 1865, was still living, a keen alpinist. She could not refrain from asking Stampa one question, though she imagined that he was now in a hurry to take the damaged carriage back to St. Moritz. "Michel Croz was a brave man," she said. "Did you know him well?" "I worshipped him, Fräulein," was the reverent answer. "May I receive pardon in my last hour, but I took him for an evil spirit on the day of his death. I was with Jean-Antoine Carroll in Signor Giordano's party. We started from Broil, Croz, and his voyageurs from Zermatt. We failed, he succeeded. When we saw him and his Englishmen on the summit, we believed they were devils, because they yelled in triumph and started an avalanche of stones to announce their victory. 3 days later, Carroll and I, with 2 men from Broil, tried again. We gained the top that time and passed the place where Crewe was knocked over by the English milord and the others who fell with him. I saw 3 bodies on the glacier 4,000 feet below, a fine burial ground, better than that up there. He looked back at the pines which now hid the cemetery wall from sight. Then, with another courteous sweep of his hat, he walked away, covering the ground rapidly despite his twisted leg. If Helen had been better trained as a woman journalist, she would have regarded this meeting with Stamper as an incident of much value. Long experience of the lights and shades of life might have rendered her less sensitive. As it was, the man's personality appealed to her. She had been vouchsafed a glimpse into an abyss profound as that into which Stamper himself peered on the day he discovered 3 of the 4 who fell from the Matterhorn, still roped together in death. The old man's simple references to the terrors lurking in those radiant mountains had also shaken her somewhat. The snow-capped Cima di Rosso no longer looked so attractive. The Orlegna Gorge had lost some of its beauty. Though the sun was pouring into its wooded depths, it had grown gloomy and sombre in her eyes. Yielding to impulse, she loitered in the village, took the carriage road to the chateau, and sat there with her back to the inner heights and her gaze fixed on the smiling valley that opened toward Italy out of the Septimer Pass. Meanwhile, Stamper hurried past the stables, where his horses were munching the remains of the little oaten loaves which form the staple food of hard-worked animals in the Alps. He entered the hotel by the main entrance, and was on his way to the manager's bureau when Spencer, smoking on the veranda, caught sight of him. Instantly the American started in pursuit. By this time he had heard of Helen's accident from one of yesterday's passers-by. It accounted for the delay, but he was anxious to learn exactly what had happened. Stamper reached the office first. He was speaking to the manager when Spencer came in and said in his downright way, "This is the man who drove Miss Winton from Stan Moritz last night. I don't suppose I shall be able to understand what he says. Will you kindly ask him what caused the trouble?" "It is quite an easy matter," was the smiling response. "Poor Stamper is not only too eager to pass every other vehicle on the road, but he is inclined to watch the mountains rather than his horse's ears. He was a famous guide once, but he met with misfortune and took to carriage work as a means of livelihood. He has damaged his turnout twice this year, so this morning he was dismissed by telephone, and another driver is coming from St. Moritz to take his place." Spencer looked at Stamper. He liked the strong, worn face, with its half-wistful, half-resigned expression. An uneasy feeling gripped him that the whim of a moment in the Embankment Hotel might exert its crazy influence in quarters far removed from the track that seemed then to be so direct and pleasure-giving. Why did he want to butt in between the other fellow and the landscape? What was the hurry, anyhow? He asked. Stamper smiled genially when the questions were translated to him. "I was talking to the signorina," he explained, using his native tongue, for he was born on the Italian side of the Bernina. "That counts, but it gives no good reason why he should risk her life," objected Spencer. Stamper's weather-furrowed cheeks reddened. "There was no danger," he muttered wrathfully. "Madonna, I would lose the use of another limb rather than hurt a hair of her head. Is she not my good angel? Has she not drawn me back from the gate of hell? Risk her life? Are people saying that because a worm-eaten wheel went to pieces against a stone?" "What on earth is he talking about?" demanded Spencer. "Has he been pestering Miss Winton this morning with some story of his present difficulties?" The manager knew Stamper's character. He put the words in kindlier phrase. "Does the signorina know that you have lost your situation?" he said. Even in that mild form the suggestion annoyed the old man. He flung it aside with scornful gesture and turned to leave the office. "Tell the gentleman to go to Zermatt and ask in the street if Christian Stamper the guide would throw himself on a woman's charity," he growled. Spencer did not wait for any interpretation. "Hold on," he said quietly. "What is he going to do now? Work for a man of his years doesn't grow on gooseberry bushes, I suppose." Christian, you are hot-headed as a boy," cried the manager. "The fact is," he went on, "he came to me to offer his services. But I have already engaged more drivers than I need, and I am dismissing some stable men. Perhaps he can find a job in Saint-Moritz. Are his days as guide ended?" "Unfortunately, yes. I believe he is as active as ever, but people won't credit it, and you cannot blame them. When one's safety depends on a man who may have to cling to an ice-covered rock like a fly to a window pane, one is apt to distrust a crooked leg." "Did he have an accident?" The manager hesitated. "It is part of his sad history," he said. "He fell and nearly killed himself, but he was hurrying to see the last of a daughter to whom he was devoted." "Is he a local man, then?" "No, oh no, the girl happened to be here when the end came." "Well, I guess he will suit my limited requirements in the fly and window pane business while I remain in Maloja, said Spencer. Tell him I am willing to put up 10 francs a day and extras for his exclusive services as guide during my stay. Poor Stamper was nearly overwhelmed by this unexpected good fortune. In his agitation he blurted out, "Ah, then, the good God did really send an angel to my help this morning." Spencer, however, reviewing his own benevolence over a pipe outside the hotel, expressed the cynical opinion that the hot sun was affecting his brain. "I'm on a loose end," he communed. "Next time I waft myself to Europe on a steamer, I'll bring my mother. It would be a bully fine notion to cable for her right away. I want someone to take care of me. It looks as if I had a cinch on running this hotel gratis. What in thunder will happen next?" He could surely have answered that query if he had the least inkling of the circumstances governing Helen's prior meeting with Stamper. As it was, the development of events followed the natural course. While Spencer strolled off by the side of the lake, the old guide lumbered into the village street and waited there, knowing that he would waylay the Bella Inglesa on her return. Though she came from the chateau and not from Cavloccio, he did not fail to see her. At first, she was at a loss to fathom the cause of Stamper's delight, and still less to understand why he should want to thank her with such exuberance. She imagined he was overjoyed at having gone back to his beloved profession, and it was only by dint of questioning that she discovered the truth. Then it dawned on her that the man had been goaded to desperation by the curt message from Stammer Wrights, that he was sorely tempted to abandon the struggle and follow into the darkness the daughter taken from him so many years ago, and the remembrance of her suspicion when they were about to part at the cemetery gate lent a serious note to her words of congratulation. "You see, Stamper," she said, "you were very wrong to lose faith this morning. At the very moment of your deepest despair, Heaven was providing a good friend for you." "Yes, indeed, Fräulein. That is why I waited here. I felt that I must thank you. It was all through you. The good God sent you." "I think you are far more beholden to the gentleman who employed you than to me," she broke in. "Yes, he is splendid, the young voyager, but it was wholly on your account, lady. He was angry with me at first because he thought I placed you in peril in the matter of the wheel." Helen was amazed. "He spoke of me," she cried. "Ah, yes. He did not say much, but his eyes looked through me. He has the eyes of a true man, that young American." She was more bewildered than ever. "What is his name?" she asked. "Here it is. The director wrote it for me so that I may learn how to pronounce it." Stamper produced a scrap of paper, and Helen read, "Mr. Charles K. Spencer. Are you quite certain he mentioned me?" she repeated. "Can I be mistaken, Fräulein?" "I know, because I studied the labels on your boxes, Mies Helene Winton, so." "And did he not rate me about the accident?" Well, wonders will never cease, she vowed, and indeed they were only just beginning in her life, which shows how blind to excellent material wonders can be. At luncheon she summoned the head waiter. "Is there a Mr. Charles K. Spencer staying in the hotel?" she asked. "Yes, madam." "Will you please tell me if he is in the room?" The head waiter turned. Spencer was studying the menu. "Yes, madam. There he is, sitting alone at the second table from the window." It was quite to be expected that the subject of their joint gaze should look at them instantly. There is a magnetism in the human eye that is unfailing in that respect, and its power is increased 100-fold when a charming young woman tries it on a young man who happens to be thinking of her at the moment. Then Spencer realized that Stamper had told Helen what had taken place in the hotel bureau, and he wanted to kick himself for having forgotten to make secrecy a part of the bargain. Helen, knowing that he knew, blushed furiously. She tried to hide her confusion by murmuring something to the head waiter. But in her heart she was saying, "Who in the world is he? I have never seen him before last night, and why am I such an idiot as to tremble all over just because he happened to catch me looking at him?" Chapter 6. The battlefield. Both man and woman were far too well bred to indulge in an eyelid. The knowledge that each was thinking of the other led rather to an ostentatious avoidance of anything that could be construed into any such flirtatious overture. Though Stamper's curious statement had puzzled Helen, she soon hit on the theory that the American must have heard of the accident to her carriage. Yes, that supplied a ready explanation. No doubt he kept a sharp lookout for her on the road. He arrived at the hotel almost simultaneously with herself, and she had not forgotten his somewhat inquiring glance as they stood together on the steps. With the chivalry of his race in all things concerning womankind, he was eager to render assistance, and under the circumstances he probably wondered what sort of damsel in distress it was that needed help. It was natural enough, too, that in engaging Stamper he should refer to the carelessness that brought about the collapse of the wheel. Really, when one came to analyse an incident seemingly inexplicable, it resolved itself into quite commonplace constituents. She found it awkward that he should be sitting between her and a window commanding the best view of the lake. If Spencer had been at any other table, she could have feasted her eyes on the whole expanse of the Ober-Engadin valley. Therefore she had every excuse for looking that way, whereas he had none for gazing at her. Spencer appeared to be aware of this disability. For lack of better occupation, he scrutinized the writing on the menu with a prolonged intentness worthy of a gourmand or an expert graphologist. Helen rose first, and that gave him an opportunity to note her graceful carriage. Though born in the States, he was of British stock, and he did not share the professed opinion of the American humorist that the typical Englishwoman is angular, has large feet, and does not know how to walk. Helen, at any rate, betrayed none of these elements of caricature. Though there were several so-called smart women in the hotel, women who clung desperately to the fringe of society on both sides of the Atlantic, his protégé was easily first among the few who had any claim to good looks. Helen was not only tall and lithe, but her movements were marked by a quiet elegance. It was her custom, in nearly all weathers, to walk from Bayswater to Professor von Eulenberg's study, which, needless to say, was situated near the British Museum. She usually returned by a longer route, unless pelting rain or the misery of London snow made the streets intolerable. Thus there was hardly a day that she did not cover 8 miles at a rapid pace, a method of training that eclipsed all the artifices of beauty doctors and schools of deportment. Her sweetly pretty face, her abundance of shining brown hair, her slim, well-proportioned figure, and the almost athletic swing of her well-arched shoulders would entitle her to notice in a gathering of beauties far more noted than those who graced Maloja with their presence that year. In addition to these physical attractions, she carried with her the rarer and indefinable aura of the born aristocrat. As it happened, she merited that description both by birth and breeding. But there is a vast company entitled to consideration on that score to whom nature has cruelly denied the necessary hallmarks. Otherwise, the pages of Burke would surely be embellished with portraits. Indeed, so far as appearance went, it was rather ludicrous to regard Helen as the social inferior of any person then resident in the Kursaal, and it is probable that a glimmering knowledge of this fact inflamed Mrs. de Courcy-Vavasour's wrath to boiling point, when a few minutes later she saw her son coolly walk up to the undesirable and enter into conversation with her. Helen was seated in a shady corner. A flood of sunlight filled the glass-covered veranda with a grateful warmth. She had picked up an astonishingly well-written and scholarly guidebook issued by the proprietors of the hotel, and was deep in its opening treatise on the history and racial characteristics of the Engadiners, when she was surprised at hearing herself addressed by name. Miss, Winton, I believe," said a drawling voice. Looking up, she found George de Courcy-Vavasour bending over her in an attitude that betokened the utmost admiration for both parties to the tete-a-tete. Under ordinary conditions, that is to say, if Vavasour's existence depended on his own exertions, Helen's eyes would have dwelt on a gawky youth endowed with a certain pertness that might in time have brought him from behind the counter of a drapery store to the wider arena of the floor. As it was, a reasonably large income gave him unbounded assurance, and his credit with a good tailor was unquestionable. He represented a British product that flourishes best in alien soil. There exists a foreign legion of George de Courcy-Vavasours, flaccid heroes of fashion plates, whose parade grounds change with the seasons from Paris to the Riviera, and from the Riviera to some nook in the Alps. Providence and a grandfather have conspired in their behalf to make work unnecessary, but Providence, more far-seeing than grandfathers, has decreed that they shall be effete and light-brained, so the type does not endure. Helen, out of the corner of her eye, became aware that Mrs. de Courcy-Vavasour was advancing with all the plumes of the British matron ruffled for battle. It was not in human nature that the girl should not recall the slight offered her the previous evening. With the thought came the temptation to repay it now with interest, but she thrust it aside. "Yes, that is my name," she said, smiling pleasantly. "Well, the General has asked me to, invite you to take part in some of our tournaments. We have tennis, you know, and golf and croquet and that sort of thing. Of course you play tennis, and I rather fancy you're a golfer as well. You look that kind of girl. Eh, what?" He caressed a small moustache as he spoke, using the finger and thumb of each hand alternately, and Helen noticed that his hands were surprisingly large when compared with his otherwise fragile frame. "Who is the General?" she inquired. Oh, Rag, you know. He looks after everything in the amusement line, and I help. Do let me put you down for the singles and mixed doubles. None of the women here can play for nuts, and I haven't got a partner yet for the doubles. I've been waiting for someone like you to turn up. You have not remained long in suspense, she could not help saying. You are Mr. Vavasor, are you not? Yes, better known as Georgie. And you arrived in Maloja last evening, I think? Well, I do play tennis, or rather, I used to play fairly well some years ago. By gad, just what I thought. Go slow in your practice games, Miss Winton, and you'll have a ripping handicap. Would that be quite honest? Said Helen, lifting her steadfast brown eyes to meet his somewhat too free scrutiny. Honest? Rather. You wait till you see the old guard pulling out a bit when they settle down to real business. But the General is up to their little dodges. He knows their form like a book, and he gets every one of 'em shaken out by the first round. Eh? What? The arrangement seems to be ideal if one is friendly with the General, said Helen. Vavasor drew up a chair. He also drew up the ends of his trousers, thus revealing that the Pomeranian brown and myrtle green stripes in his necktie were faithfully reproduced in his socks, while these master tints were thoughtfully developed in the subdominant hues of his clothes and boots. By Jove, what a stroke of luck I should have got hold of you first, he chuckled. I'm pretty good at the net, Miss Winton. If we manage things properly, we ought to have the mixed doubles a gift with plus half 40, and in the ladies' singles you'll be a Queen's Club champion at 6 stone 9. Eh? What? Though Vavasor represented a species of inane young man whom Helen detested, she bore with him because she hungered for the sound of an English voice in friendly converse this bright morning. At times her life was lonely enough in London, but she had never felt her isolation there. The great city appealed to her in all its moods. Her cheerful yet sensitive nature did not shrink from contact with its hurrying crowds. The mere sense of aloofness among so many millions of people brought with it the knowledge that she was one of them. A human atom plunged into a heedless vortex the moment she passed from her house into the street. Here in Maloja, things were different. While her own identity was laid bare, while men and women canvassed her name, her appearance, her occupation, she was cut off from them by a social wall of their own contriving. The attitude of the younger women told her that trespassers were forbidden within that sacred fold. She knew now that she had done a daring thing, outraged one of the cheap conventions, in coming alone to this clique-ridden Swiss valley. Better 1,000 times have sought lodgings in some small village inn, and mixed with the homely folk who journeyed thither on the diligence or tramped joyously afoot, than strive to win the sympathy of any of these shallow nonentities of the smart set. Even while listening to Georgie's efforts to win her smiles with slangy confidences, she saw that Mrs. Vavasor had halted in mid-career and joined a group of women, evidently a mother and 2 daughters, and that she herself was the subject of their talk. She wondered why. She was somewhat perplexed when the conclave broke up suddenly, the girls going to the door, Mrs. Vavasor retreating majestically to the far end of the veranda, and the other elderly woman drawing a short, fat, red-faced man away from a discussion with another man. Jolly place, this, Vavasor was saying. There's dancing most nights. The Dowager Brigade want the band to play classical music, and that sort of rot, you know, but Mrs. de la Vere and the rag girls like a hop, and we generally arrange things our own way. We'll have a dance tonight if you wish it, but you must promise to— Georgie, cried the pompous little man, I want you a minute. Vavasor swung round. Evidently he regarded the interruption as a beastly bore. All right, General, he said airily. I'll be there soon. No hurry, is there? Yes, I want you now. The order was emphatic. The General's only military asset was a martinet voice, and he made the most of it. Rather rotten, isn't it, interfering with a fellow in this way, muttered Vavasor. Will you excuse me? I must see what the old boy is worrying about. I shall come back soon. What? I am going out, said Helen. But we shall meet again. I remain here a month. You'll enter for the tournament? He asked over his shoulder. I think so. It will be something to do. Thanks awfully, and don't forget tonight. Helen laughed. She could not help it. The younger members of the Rag family were eyeing her sourly through the glass partition. They seemed to be nice girls too, and she made up her mind to disillusion them speedily if they thought that she harboured designs on the callow youth, whom they probably regarded as their own special cavalier. When she passed through the inner doorway to go to her room, she noticed that the General was giving Georgie some instructions which were listened to in sulky silence. Indeed, that remarkable ex-warrior was laying down the law of the British parish with a clearness that was admirable. He had been young himself once, damn it, and had as keen an eye for a pretty face as any other fellow. But no gentleman could strike up an acquaintance with an unattached female under the very nose of his mother, not to mention the noses of other ladies who were his friends. Georgie broke out in protest. "Oh, but I say, General, she is a lady, and you yourself said." "I know I did. I was wrong. Even a wary old bird like me can make a mistake. Mrs. Vavasor has just warned my wife about her. It's no good arguing, Georgie, my boy. Nowadays you can't draw the line too rigidly. Things permissible in Paris or Nice won't pass muster here. I'm sorry, Georgie. She's a high stepper and devilish taking, I admit. Writes for some ha'penny rag, for some cheap society paper, I hear. Why, dash it all, she will be lampooning us in it before we know where we are. Just you go and tell your mother you'll behave better in future." Excellent woman, Mrs. Vavasor. She never makes a mistake. Gad, don't you remember how she spotted that waiter from the Ritz who gulled the lot of us at the Jetty last winter? Took him for the French Marquis, he said he was, every one of us, women and all, till Mrs. V fixed her eye on him and said, "Gustav, damn!" How he curled up. George was still obdurate. A masquerading waiter differed from Helen in many essentials. He was a Frenchman, and they're mostly rotters. This girl is English, General, and I shall look a proper sort of an ass if I freeze up suddenly after what I've said to her. Not for the first time, my boy, and mebbe not for the last. Then, in view of the younger man's obvious defiance, the General's white moustache bristled. "Of course you can please yourself," he growled, "but neither Mrs. Ragg nor my daughters will tolerate your acquaintance with that person." "Oh, all right, General," came the irritated answer. "Between you and the mater I've got to come to heel, but it's a beastly shame, I say, and you're all making a jolly big mistake." George's intelligence might be superficial, but he knew a lady when he met one, and Helen had attracted him powerfully. He was thanking his stars for the good fortune that numbered him among the earliest of her acquaintances in the hotel, and it was too bad that the barring edict should have been issued against her so unexpectedly. But he was not of a fighting breed, and he quailed before the threat of Mrs. Ragg's displeasure. Helen, after a delightful ramble past the chateau and along the picturesque turns and twists of the Colline des Artistes, returned in time for tea, which was served on the veranda, the common rendezvous of the hotel during daylight. No one spoke to her. She went out again and walked by the lake till the shadows fell and the mountains glittered in purple and gold. She dressed herself in a simple white evening frock, dined in solitary state, and ventured into the ballroom after dinner. Georgie was dancing with Mrs. de la Verre, a languid-looking woman who seemed to be pining for admiration. At the conclusion of the waltz that was going on when Helen entered, Vavasour brought his partner a whisky and soda and a cigarette. He passed Helen twice, but ignored her, and whirled one of the Rag girls off into a polka. Again he failed to see her when parties were being formed for a quadrille. Even to herself she did not attempt to deny a feeling of annoyance, though she extracted a bitter amusement from the knowledge that she had been slighted by such a vapid creature. She was under no misconception as to what had happened. The women were making a dead set against her. If she had been plain or dowdy, they might have been friendly enough. It was an unpardonable offence that she should be good-looking, unchaperoned, and not one of the queerly assorted mixture they deemed their monde. For a few minutes she was really angry. She realised that her only crime was poverty. Given a little share of the wealth held by many of these passee matrons and bold-eyed girls, she would be a reigning star among them and could act and talk as she liked. Yet her shyness and reserve would have been her best credentials to any society that was constituted on a sounder basis than a gathering of snobs. Among really well-born people, she would certainly have been received on an equal footing until some valid reason for ostracism was forthcoming. The imported limpets on this Swiss rock of gentility were not sure of their own grip. Hence they strenuously refused to make room for a newcomer until they were shoved aside. Poor disillusioned Helen. When she went to church, she prayed to the good Lord to deliver her and everybody else from envy, hatred, and malice, and all uncharitableness. She felt now that there might well be added to the litany a fresh petition which should include British communities on the continent in the list of avoidable evils. At that instant the piquant face and figure of Millicent Jakes rose before her mind's eye. She pictured to herself the cool effrontery with which the actress would crush these waspish women by creating a court of every eligible man in the place. It was not a healthy thought, but it was the offspring of sheer vexation, and Helen experienced her second temptation that day when de la Verre, the irresistible Reginald of Mrs. Vavasour's sketchy reminiscences, came and asked her to dance. She recognized him at once. He sat with Mrs. de la Verre at table and never spoke to her unless it was strictly necessary. He had distinguished manners, a pleasant voice, and a charming smile, and he seemed to be the devoted slave of every pretty woman in the hotel except his wife. "Please pardon the informality," he said, with an affability that cloaked the impertinence. "We are quite a family party at Maloja. I hear you are staying here some weeks, and we are bound to get to know each other sooner or later." Helen could dance well. She was so mortified by the injustice meted out to her that she almost accepted de la Verre's partnership on the spur of the moment. But her soul rebelled against the man's covert insolence, and she said quietly, "No, thank you. I do not care to dance." "May I sit here and talk?" he persisted. "I am just going," she said, "and I think Mrs. de la Verre is looking for you." By happy chance, the woman in question was standing alone in the centre of the ballroom, obviously in quest of some man who would take her to the foyer for a cigarette. Helen retreated with the honours of war, but the irresistible one only laughed. "That idiot Georgie told the truth, then," he admitted. "And she knows what the other women are saying. What cats these dear creatures can be, to be sure." Spencer happened to be an interested onlooker. Indeed, he was trying to arrive at the best means of obtaining an introduction to Helen when he saw de la Verre stroll leisurely up to her with the assured air of one sated by conquest. The girl brushed close to him as he stood in the passage. She held her head high, and her eyes were sparkling. He had not heard what was said, but de la Verre's discomfiture was so patent that even his wife smiled as she sailed out on the arm of a youthful purveyor of cigarettes. Spencer longed for an opportunity to kick de la Verre, yet, in some sense, he shared that redoubtable lady-killer's rebuff. He too was wondering if the social life of a Swiss hotel would permit him to seek a dance with Helen. Under existing conditions, it would provide quite a humorous episode, he told himself, to strike up a friendship with her. He could not imagine why she had adopted such an aloof attitude toward all and sundry, but it was quite evident that she declined anything in the guise of promiscuous acquaintance. And he, like her, felt lonely. There were several Americans in the hotel, and he would probably meet some of the men in the bar or smoking room after the dance was ended. But he would have preferred a pleasant chat with Helen that evening, and now she had gone to her room in a huff. Then an inspiration came to him. "Guess I'll stir up Mackenzie to send along an introduction," he said. "A telegram will fix things." It was not quite so easy to explain matters in the curt language of the wire, he found, and it savoured of absurdity to amaze the beer-drinking Scot with a long message. So he compromised between desire and expediency by a letter. "Dear Mr. Mackenzie," he wrote, "life is not rapid at this terminus. It might take on some new features if I had the privilege of saying, 'How dee to Miss Winton.' Will you oblige me by telling her that one of your best and newest friends happens to be in the same hotel as her charming self, and that if she gets him to sparkle, he, which is I, will help considerable with copy for the Firefly. Advise me by same post, and the rest of the situation is up to yours faithfully, C.K.S." The letter was posted, and Spencer waited 5 tiresome days. He saw little or nothing of Helen, save at meals. Once he met her on a footpath that runs through a wood by the side of the lake to the little hamlet of Isola, and he was minded to raise his hat, as he would have done to any other woman in the hotel whom he encountered under similar circumstances. But she deliberately looked away, and his intended courtesy must have passed unheeded. As he sedulously avoided any semblance of dogging her footsteps, he could not know how she was being persecuted by de la Verre, Vavasseur, and 1 or 2 other men of like habit. That knowledge was yet to come. Consequently, he deemed her altogether too prudish, and was so out of patience with her that he and Stamper went off for a 2 days' climb by way of the Muretto Pass to Chiareggio and back to Sils, Maria over the Fex Glacier. Footsore and tired, but thoroughly converted to the marvels of the high Alps, he reached the Casale side by side with the postman who brought the chief English mail about 6 o'clock each evening. He waited with an eager crowd of residents while the hall porter sorted the letters. There were some for him from America, and one from London in a handwriting that was strange to him. But he had quick eyes, and he saw that a letter addressed to Miss Helen Winton in the flamboyant envelope of the Firefly bore the same script. Mackenzie had risen to the occasion. He even indulged in a classical joke. "There is something in the name of Helen that attracts," he said. "Were it not for the lady whose face drew 1,000 ships to Ilium, we should never have heard of Paris, or Troy, or the heel of Achilles, and all these would be greatly missed." And I should never have heard of Mackenzie or Maloja, thought Spencer, sinking into a chair and looking about to learn whether or not the girl would find her letter before he went to dress for dinner. He was sure she knew his name. Perhaps when she read the editor's note, she too would search the spacious lounge with those fine eyes of hers for the man described therein. If that were so, he meant to go to her instantly, discuss the strangeness of the coincidence that led to two of Mackenzie's friends being at the hotel at the same time, and suggest that they should dine together. The project seemed feasible, and it was decidedly pleasant in perspective. He longed to compare notes with her, to tell her the quaint stories of the hills related to him by Stamper in a medley of English, French, Italian and German, perhaps to plan delightful trips to the fairyland in company. People began to clear away from the hall porter's table, yet Helen remained invisible. He could hardly have missed her, but to make certain he rose and glanced at the few remaining letters. Yes, the firefly's gaudy imprint still gleamed at him. He turned away, disappointed. After his long tramp and a night in a weird Italian inn, a bath was imperative and the boom of the dressing-gong was imminent. He was crossing the hall toward the elevator when he heard her voice. "I am so glad you are keen on an early climb," she was saying, with a new note of confidence that stirred him strangely. "I have been longing to leave the signboards and footpaths far behind, but I felt rather afraid of going to the Forno for the first time with a guide. You see, I know nothing about mountaineering, and you can put me up to all the dodges beforehand." "Show you the ropes, in fact," agreed the man with her, Mark Bauer. Spencer was so completely taken by surprise that he could only stare at the two as though they were ghosts. They had entered the hotel together and had apparently been out for a walk. Helen picked up her letter and held it carelessly in her hand while she continued to talk with Bauer. Her pleasurable excitement was undeniable. She regarded her companion as a friend and was evidently overjoyed at his presence. Spencer banged into the elevator, astonished the attendant and two other occupants by the savagery of his command, au deuxième vite, and paced through a long corridor with noisy clatter of hobnailed boots. He was in a rare fret and fume when he sat down to dinner alone. Howell was at Helen's table. It was brightened by rare flowers, not often seen in sterile Maloja. A bottle of champagne rested in an ice bucket by his side. He had brought with him the atmosphere of London, of the peasant life that London offers to those who can buy her favours. Truly, this Helen, all unconsciously, had not only found the heel of a modern Achilles, but was wounding him sorely. For now, Spencer knew that he wanted to see her frank eyes smiling into his, as they were smiling into Bauer's, and, no matter what turn events took, a sinister element had been thrust into a harmless idyll by this man's arrival. Chapter 7. Some skirmishing. Later, the Americans saw the two sitting in the hall. They were chatting with the freedom of old friends. Helen's animated face showed that the subject of their talk was deeply interesting. She was telling Bauer of the slights inflicted on her by the other women, but Spencer interpreted her intent manner as supplying sufficient proof of a stronger emotion than mere friendliness. He was beginning to detest Bauer. It was his habit to decide quickly when two ways opened before him. He soon settled his course now. To remain in the hotel under present conditions involved a loss of self-respect, he thought. He went to the bureau, asked for his account, and ordered a carriage to Saint-Moritz for the morrow's fast train to England. The manager was politely regretful. "You are leaving us at the wrong time, sir," he said. "Within the next few days we ought to have a midsummer storm when even the lower hills will be covered with snow. Then we usually enjoy a long spell of magnificent weather." "Sorry," said Spencer. "I like the scramble up there," and he nodded in the direction of the Bernina Range, "and old Stamper is a gem of a guide. But I can hardly put off any longer some business that needs attention in England. Anyhow, I shall come back, perhaps next month. Stamper says it is all right here in September. Our best month, I assure you, and the ideal time to drop down into Italy when you are tired of the mountains. I must let it go at that. I intend to fix Stamper so that he can remain here till the end of the season, so you see I mean to return." "He was very fortunate in meeting you, Mr. Spencer," said the manager warmly. "Well, it is time he had a slice of luck. I've taken a fancy to the old fellow. One night, in the Forno hut, he told me something of his story. I guess it will please him to stop at the Maloja for a while." "He told you about his daughter?" came the tentative question. "Not all?" "I am afraid there was no difficulty in filling in the blanks. I heard enough to make me respect him and sympathize with his troubles." The manager shook his head with the air of one who recalls that which he would willingly have forgotten. "Such incidents are rare in Switzerland," he said. "I well remember the sensation her death created. She was such a pretty girl. The young men at Pontresina called her the Edelweiss because she was so inaccessible. In fact, poor Stamper had educated her beyond her station, and that is not always good for a woman, especially in these quiet valleys where knowledge of cattle and garden produce is a better asset than speaking French and playing the piano." Spencer agreed. He could name other districts where the same rule held good. He stood for a moment in the spacious hall to light a cigar. Involuntarily he glanced at Helen. She met his gaze and said something to Bauer that caused the latter also to turn and look. "She has read Mackenzie's letter," thought Spencer, taking refuge behind a cloud of smoke. "It will be bad behaviour on my part to leave the hotel without making my bow. Shall I go to her now or wait till morning?" He reflected that Helen might be out early next day. If he presented his introduction at once, she would probably ask him to sit with her a little while, and then he must become acquainted with Bauer. He disliked the notion, but he saw no way out of it, unless indeed Helen treated him with the chilling abruptness she meted out to other men in the hotel who tried to become friendly with her. He was weighing the pros and cons dispassionately when the English chaplain approached. "Do you play bridge, Mr. Spencer?" he asked. "I know the leads, and call without, on the least provocation," was the reply. "You are the very man I am searching for, and I have the authority of the first book of Samuel in my quest. Well now, that is the last place in which I should expect to find my bridge portrait. Don't you remember how Saul's servants asked his permission to seek out a man who is a cunning player? That is exactly what I am doing. Come to the smoking room. There are 2 other men there, and one is a fellow countryman of yours." The Reverend Mr. Hare was a genial soul, a Somersetshire vicar who took his annual holiday by accepting a temporary position in some alpine village where there was an English church. He did not dream that he was acting the part of Hermes, messenger of the gods, at that moment, for indeed his appearance on the scene just then changed the whole trend of Spencer's actions. "What a delightful place this is," he went on as they walked together through a long corridor. "But what is the matter with the people? They don't mix. I would not have believed that there were so many prigs in the British Isles." Some such candid opinion had occurred to Spencer, but, being an American, he thought that perhaps he might be mistaken. "The English character is somewhat adaptable to environment, I have heard. That is why you send out such excellent colonists," he said. "Doesn't that go rather to prove that everybody here should be hail fellow well met?" "Not at all. They take their pose from the Alps. Snow, glaciers, hard rock, you know. That is the subtlety of it." The vicar laughed. "You have given me a new point of view," he said. "Some of them are slippery customers too. Yes, one might carry the parallel a long way, but here we are. Now, mind you cut me as a partner. I have tried the others and found them severely critical. As bridge players, you look a stoic." The vicar had his wish. Spencer and he opposed a man from Pittsburgh named Holt and Dunstan, an Englishman. While the latter was shuffling the cards for Hare's deal, he said something that took one, at least of his hearers, by surprise. "Bauer has turned up, I see. What has brought him to the Engadin at this time of year I can't guess, unless perhaps he is interested in a pretty face." "At this time of the year," repeated Spencer. "Isn't this the season?" "Not for him. He used to be a famous climber, but he has given it up since he waxed fat and prosperous. I have met him once or twice at St. Moritz in the winter. Otherwise, he usually shows up in the fashionable resorts in August, Ostend or Trouville, or, if he is Livery, Vichy or Aix-les-Bains, anywhere but this quiet spot. Bauer likes excitement too. He often opens £1,000 bank at baccarat, whereas people are shocked in Maloja at seeing her play bridge at 10 pence a hundred." "I leave it, partner," broke in the vicar, to whom the game was the thing. "No trumps," said Spencer, without giving the least heed to his cards. It was true his eyes were resting on the ace, king, and queen of spades, but his mind was tortured by the belief that by his fantastic conceit in sending Helen to this alpine fastness he had delivered her bound to the vultures. "Double no trumps," said Dunstan, gloating over the possession of a long suit of hearts and 3 aces. Hare looked anxious, and Spencer suddenly awoke to the situation. "Satisfied," he said. Holt led the 3 of hearts, and Spencer spread his cards on the table with the gravity of a Sioux chief. In addition to the 3 high spades, he held 6 others. "Really?" gasped the parson. "A most remarkable declaration." Yet there was an agitated triumph in his voice that was not pleasant hearing for Dunstan, who took the trick with the ace of hearts and led the lowest of a sequence to the queen. "Got him," panted Hare, producing the king. The rest was easy. The vicar played a small spade and scored 96 points without any further risk. "It is magnificent, but it is not bridge," said the man from Pittsburgh. Dunstan simply glowered. "Partner," demanded Hare timidly, "may I ask why you called no trumps on a hand like that?" "Thought I would give you a chance of distinguishing yourself," replied Spencer. "Besides, that sort of thing rattles your opponents at the beginning of a game. Keep your nerve now, Padre, and you have 'em in a cleft stick." As it happened, Holt made a no-trump declaration on a very strong hand, but Spencer held 7 clubs headed by the ace and king. He doubled, Holt redoubled, Spencer doubled again. Hare flushed somewhat. "Allow me to say that I am very fond of bridge, but I cannot take part in a game that savours of gambling, even for low stakes," he broke in. "Shall we let her go at 48 points a trick?" Spencer asked. "Yep," snapped Holt. "Got all the clubs?" "Not all. Sufficient, perhaps." He played the ace. Dunstan laid the queen and knave on the table. Spencer scored the winning trick before his adversary obtained an opening. "You have a backbone of cast steel," commented Dunstan, who was an iron master. "Do you play baccarat?" he went on, with curious eagerness. "I regret to state that my education was completed in a Western mining camp. Will you excuse the liberty, and perhaps Mr. Hare won't listen for a moment? But I will finance you in 3 banks of 1,000 each, either banking or punting, if you promise to take on Bauer. I can arrange it easily. I say this because you personally may not care to play for high sums." The suggestion was astounding, coming as it did from a stranger, but Spencer merely said, "You don't like Bauer, then?" "That is so. I have business relations with him occasionally, and there he is, all that could be wished. But I have seen him clean out more than one youngster ruthlessly. Force the play to too high stakes, I mean. I think you could take his measure. Anyhow, I am prepared to back you. I'm leaving here tomorrow. Ah, well, we may have another opportunity. If so, my offer holds." "Guess you haven't heard that Spencer is the man who bored a tunnel through the Rocky Mountains," said Holt. "No, you must tell me about it." "Sorry, Mr. Hare, I am stopping the game." Spencer continued to have amazing good fortune, and he played with skill, but without any more fireworks. At the close of the sitting, the vicar said cheerfully, "You are not a ladies' man, Mr. Spencer. You know the old proverb, lucky at cards, unlucky in love, but let me hope that it does not apply in your case." "Talking about a ladies' man, who is the girl your friend Bauer dined with?" asked Holt. "She has been in the hotel several days, but she didn't seem to be acquainted with anybody in particular until he blew in this afternoon." "She is a Miss Helen Winton," said the vicar. "I like her very much from what little I have seen of her. She attended both services on Sunday, and I happen to be aware of the fact that she was at Mass in the Roman Church earlier. I wanted her to play the harmonium next Sunday, but she declined, and gave me her reasons too." "May I ask what they were?" inquired Spencer. "Well, speaking in confidence, they were grievously true. Some miserable pandering to Mrs. Grundy has set the other women against her, so she declined to thrust herself into prominence. I tried to talk her out of it, but failed." "Who is Mrs. Grundy, anyhow?" growled Holt. The others laughed. "She is the Medusa of modern life," explained the vicar. "She turns to stone those who gaze on her. Most certainly she petrifies all good feeling and Christian tolerance. Why, I actually heard a woman whose conduct is not usually governed by what I hold to be good taste sneer at Miss Winton this evening. 'The murder is out now,' she said. Bauer's presence explains everything. Yet I am able to state that Miss Winton was quite unprepared for his arrival. By chance I was standing on the steps when he drove up to the hotel, and it was perfectly clear from the words they used that neither was aware that the other was in Maloja." Spencer leaned over toward the ironmaster. "Tell you what," he said, "I've changed my mind about the trip to England tomorrow. Get up that game with Bauer. I'll stand the racket myself unless you want to go half shares." "Done? I should like to have an interest in it. Not that I am pining for Bauer's money, and it may be that he will win ours, but I am keen on giving him a sharp run. At Nice last January, not a soul in the casino would go banco when he opened a big bank. They were afraid of him." While he was speaking, Dunstan's shrewd eyes dwelt on the younger man's unmoved face. He wondered what had caused this sudden veering of purpose. It was certainly not the allurement of heavy gambling, for Spencer had declined the proposal as coolly as he now accepted it. Being a man of the world, he thought he could peer beneath the mask. To satisfy himself, he harked back to the personal topic. "By the way, does anyone know who Miss Winton is?" he said. "That inveterate gossip, Mrs. Vavasour, who can vouch for every name in the Red Book, says she is a lady journalist." "That, at any rate, is correct," said the vicar. "In fact, Miss Winton herself told me so. Jolly fine girl, whatever she is." To give Bower his due, he has always been a person of taste. "I have reason to believe," said Spencer, "that Miss Winton's acquaintance with Mr. Bower is of the slightest." His words were slow and clear. Dunstan, sure now that his guess was fairly accurate, hastened to efface an unpleasant impression. "Of course, I only meant that if Bower is seen talking to any woman, it may be taken for granted that she is a pretty one," he explained. "But who's for a drink? Perhaps we shall meet our expected opponent in the bar, Mr. Spencer. I have some letters to write. Fix that game for tomorrow or next day, and I'll be on hand." Dunstan and Holt paid the few shillings they owed and went out. Hare did not move. He looked anxious, almost annoyed. "It is exceedingly ridiculous how circumstances pass beyond a man's control occasionally," he protested. "Am I right in assuming that, until this evening, neither Bower nor Dunstan was known to you, Mr. Spencer?" "Absolutely correct, Vicar." "I have never yet spoken to Bower, and you heard all that passed between Dunstan and myself. Then my harmless invitation to you to join in a game at cards has led directly to an arrangement for play at absurdly high figures. It seems to me, Mr. Hare, that Bower's tracks and mine are destined to cross in more ways than one in the near future," said Spencer coolly. But the vicar was not to be switched away from the new thought that was troubling him. "I will not ask what you mean," he said, gazing steadfastly at the American. "My chief concern is the outcome of my share in this evening's pleasant amusement. I cannot shut my ears to the fact that you have planned the loss or gain of some thousands of pounds on the turn of a card at baccarat. If it is disagreeable to you, how can it be otherwise? I am a broad-minded man, and I see no harm whatever in playing bridge for pennies. But I am more pained than I care to confess at the prospect of such a sequel to our friendly meeting tonight. If this thing happens, if a small fortune is won or lost merely to gratify Dunstan's whim, I assure you that I shall never touch a card again as long as I live." Then Spencer laughed. "That would be too bad, Mr. Hare," he cried. "Make your mind easy. The game is off. Count on me for the 10pence, 100 limit, after dinner tomorrow. Now, that is quite good and kind of you. Dunstan made me very miserable by his mad proposition. Of course, both he and Bower are rich men to whom a few £1,000s are of little importance. Or, to be accurate, they profess not to care whether they win or lose, though their wealth is not squandered so heedlessly when it is wanted for some really deserving object. But perhaps that is uncharitable. My only wish is to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your generous promise." "Is Bower so very rich, then? Have you met him before?" "He is a reputed millionaire. I read of him in the newspapers at times. In my small country parish such financial luminaries twinkle from a far sky. It is true he is a recent light. He made a great deal of money in copper, I believe." "What kind of character do you give him? Good, bad, or indifferent?" Hare's benevolent features showed the astonishment that thrilled him at this blunt question. "I hardly know what to say," he stammered. Spencer liked this cheery vicar and resolved to trust him. "Let me explain," he said. "You and I agree in thinking that Miss Winton is an uncommonly nice girl. I am not on her visiting list at present, so my judgment is altruistic. Suppose she was your daughter or niece, would you care to see her left to that man's mercies?" The clergyman fidgeted a little before he answered. Spencer was a stranger to him, yet he felt drawn toward him. The strong, clear-cut face won confidence. "If it was the will of heaven, I would sooner see her in the grave," he said, with solemn candour. Spencer rose. He held out his hand. "I guess it's growing late," he cried, "and our talk has swung round to a serious point. Sleep well, Mr. Hare. That game is dead off." As he passed the bar, he heard Bower's smooth, well-rounded accents through the half-open door. "Nothing I should like better," he was saying. "Are you tired? If not, bring your friend to my rooms now. Although I have been in the train all night, I am fit as a fiddle. Let me see, I left him in the smoking room with our padre." It was Dunstan who spoke, but Bower broke in. "Oh, keep the clergy out of it. They make such a song about these things if they hear of them. I was going to say that if he is not there, he will be in his room. He is 2 doors from me, number 61, I think. Shall I fetch him?" Do, by all means. By Jove, I didn't expect to get any decent play here." Spencer slipped into a small vestibule where he had left a hat and overcoat. He remained there till Dunstan crossed the hall and entered the elevator. Then he went out, meaning to stroll and smoke in the moonlight for an hour. It would be easier to back out of the promised game in the morning than at that moment. Moreover, in the clear, still air he could plan a course of action, the need of which was becoming insistent. He was blessed, or cursed, with a stubborn will, and he knew it. Hitherto, it had been exercised on a theory wrapped in hard granite, and the granite had yielded, justifying the theory. Now he was brought face to face with a woman's temperament, and his experience of that elusive and complex mixture of attributes was of the slightest. Attractive young women in Colorado are plentiful as cranberries, but never one of them had withdrawn his mind's eye from his work. Why, then, was he so ready now to devote his energies to the safeguarding of Helen Winton? It was absurd to pretend that he was responsible for her future well-being because of the whim that sent her on a holiday. She was well able to take care of herself. She had earned her own living before he met her. She had risen imperiously above the petty malice displayed by some of the residents in the hotel. There was a reasonable probability that she might become the wife of a man highly placed and wealthy. Every consideration told in favour of a policy of non-interference. The smoking of an inch of good cigar placed the matter in such a convincing light that Spencer was half resolved to abide by his earlier decision and leave Maloja next morning. But the other half, made up of inclination, pleaded against all the urging of expediency. He deemed the vicar an honest man, and that stout-hearted phrase of his stuck. Yet, whether he went or stayed, the ultimate solution of the problem lay with Helen herself. Once on speaking terms with her, he could form a more decided view. It was wonderful how one's estimate of a man or woman could be modified in the course of a few minutes' conversation. Well, he would settle things that way, and meanwhile enjoy the beauty of a wondrous night. A full moon was flooding the landscape with a brilliance not surpassed in the crystal atmosphere of Denver. The snow-capped summit of the Cima di Rosso was fit to be a peak in Olympus, a silver-throned height where the gods sat in council. The brooding pines perched on the hillside beyond the Orlegna looked like a company of gigantic birds with folded wings. From the road leading to the village he could hear the torrent itself singing its mad song of freedom after escaping from the icy caverns of the Forno Glacier. Quite near, on the right, the tiny cascade that marks the first seaward flight of the inn mingled its sweet melody with the orchestral thunder of the more distant cataracts plunging down the precipices toward Italy. It was a night when one might listen to the music of the spheres, and Spencer was suddenly jarred into unpleasant consciousness of his surroundings by the raucous voices of some peasants bawling a Romansch ballad in a wayside winehouse. Turning sharply on his heel, he took the road by the lake. There at least he would find peace from the strenuous amours of Margarita as trolled by the revellers. He had not gone 300 yards before he saw a woman standing near the low wall that guarded the embanked highway from the water. She was looking at the dark mirror of the lake, and seemed to be identifying the stars reflected in it. 3 or 4 times, as he approached, she tilted her head back and gazed at the sky. The skirt of a white dress was visible below a heavy ulster, a knitted shawl was wrapped loosely over her hair and neck, and the ends were draped deftly across her shoulders. But before she turned to see who was coming along the road, Spencer had recognized her. Thus, in a sense, he was a trifle the more prepared of the two for this unforeseen meeting, and he hailed it as supplying the answer to his doubts. "Now," said he to himself, "I shall know in 10 seconds whether or not I travel west by north tomorrow." Helen did not avert her glance instantly, nor did she at once resume a stroll evidently interrupted to take in deep breaths of the beauty of the scene. That was encouraging to the American. She expected him to speak to her. He halted in the middle of the road. If he was mistaken, he did not wish to alarm her. "If you will pardon the somewhat unorthodox time and place, I should like to make myself known to you, Miss Winton," he said, lifting his cap. "You are Mr. Spencer," she answered with a frank smile. "Yes, I have a letter of introduction from Mr. Mackenzie. So have I. What do we do next? Exchange letters? Mine is in the hotel. Suppose we just shake? Well, that is certainly the most direct way." Their hands met. They were both aware of a whiff of nervousness. For some reason, the commonplace greetings of politeness fell awkwardly from their lips. In such a predicament, a woman may always be trusted to find the way out. It is rather absurd that we should be saying how pleased we are that Mr. Mackenzie thought of writing those letters, while in reality I am horribly conscious that I ought not to be here at all, and you are probably thinking that I am quite an amazing person." And Helen laughed light-heartedly. "That is part of my thought," said Spencer. "Won't you tell me the remainder? May I? Please do. I am in chastened mood. I wish I was skilled in the trick of words, then I might say something real cute. As it is, I can only supply a sort of condensed statement, something about a nymph, a moonlit lake, the spirit of the glen, nice catchy phrases everyone, with a line thrown in from Shelley about an Obed maiden with white fire laden. Let me go back 100 yards, Miss Winton, and I shall return with the whole thing in order. With such material I believe you would bring me a sonnet. No, I hail from the wild and woolly West, where life itself is a poem, so I stick to prose. There is a queer sort of kink in human nature to account for that. On the principle that a Londoner never hears the roar of London, I suppose? Exactly. An old lady I know once came across a remarkable instance of it. She watched a ship, wreck, the real article, with all the scenic accessories, and when a half-drowned sailor was dragged ashore, she asked him how he felt at that awful moment. And what do you think he said? "Very wet," laughed Helen. "No, that is the other story. This man said he was very dry." Ah, the one step from the sublime to the ridiculous, which reminds me that if I remain here much longer talking nonsense, I shall lose the good opinion I am sure you have formed of me from Mr. Mackenzie's letter. Why? It must be after 11 o'clock. Are you going any farther, or will you walk with me to the hotel? If you will allow me, indeed, I shall be very glad of your company. I came out to escape my own thoughts. Did you ever meet such an unsociable lot of people as our fellow boarders, Mr. Spencer? If it was not for my work, and the fact that I have taken my room for a month, I should hie me forthwith to the beaten track of the vulgar but good-natured tourist. Why not go? Let me help you, tomorrow to map out a tour. Then I shall know precisely where to waylay you, for I feel the chill here too. I wish I could fall in with the first part of your proposal, though the second rather suggests that you regard Mr. Mackenzie's letter of introduction as a letter of marque. At any rate, I am an avowed pirate, he could not help retorting. But to keep strictly to business, why not quit if you feel like wandering? Because I was sent here, on a journalistic mission which I understand less now than when I received it in London. Of course, I am delighted with the place. It is the people I kick at. Is that a quite proper Americanism? It seems to fit the present case like a glove, or may I say, like a shoe. Now you are laughing at me, inwardly of course, and I agree with you. Ladies should not use slang, nor should they promenade alone in Swiss valleys by moonlight. My excuse is that I did not feel sleepy, and the moon tempted me. Good night. They were yet some little distance from the hotel, and Spencer was at a loss to account for this sudden dismissal. She saw the look of bewilderment in his face. "I have found a backstairs door," she explained with a smile. "I really don't think I should have dared to come out at 10:30 if I had to pass the Gorgons in the foyer." She flitted away by a side path, leaving Spencer more convinced than ever that he had blundered egregiously in dragging this sedate and charming girl from the quiet round of existence in London to the artificial life of the Cursail. Some feeling of unrest had driven her forth to commune with the stars. Was she asking herself why she was denied the luxuries showered on the doll-like creatures whose malicious tongues were busy the instant Bauer set foot in the hotel? It would be an ill outcome of his innocent subterfuge if she returned to England discontented and rebellious. She was in chastened mood, she had said. He wondered why. Had Bauer been too confident, too sure of his prey to guard his tongue? Of all the unlooked-for developments that could possibly be bound up with the harmless piece of midsummer madness that sent Helen Winton to Switzerland, surely this ruse presence was the most irritating and perplexing. Then from the road came another stanza from the wine-bibbers, now homeward bound. They were still howling about Margarita in long, sustained cadences, and Spencer knew his Faust. It was to the moon that the lovesick maiden confided her dreams, and Mephisto was at hand to jog the elbow of his bewitched philosopher at exactly the right moment. Spencer threw his cigar into the gurgling rivulet of the inn. He condemned Switzerland and the Ober-Engadin, and the very great majority of the guests in the Cursail, in one emphatic malediction, and went to his room, hoping to sleep, but actually to lie awake for hours and puzzle his brains in vain effort to evolve a satisfying sequel to the queer combination of events he had set in motion when he ran bareheaded into the Strand after Bauer's motor car. Chapter 8. Shadows. It is a glorious morning. If the weather holds, your first visit to the real Alps should be memorable, said Bauer. Helen had just descended the long flight of steps in front of the hotel. A tender purple light filled the valley. The nearer hills were silhouetted boldly against a sky of primrose and pink, but the misty depths where the lake lurked beneath the pines had not yet yielded wholly to the triumph of the new day. The air had a cold life in it that invigorated while it chilled. It resembled some vin frappe of rare vintage. Its fragrant vivacity was ready to burst forth at the first encouraging hint of a kindlier temperature. "Why that dubious clause as to the weather?" asked Helen, looking at the golden shafts of sunlight on the topmost crags of Corvatsch and the Piz della Marga. Those far-off summits were so startlingly vivid in outline that they seemed to be more accessible than the mist-shrouded ravines cleaving their dun sides. It needed an effort of the imagination to correct the erring testimony of the eye. "The moods of the hills are variable, my lady. Femininely fickle, in fact. There is a proverb that contrasts the wind with woman's mind. But the disillusioned male who framed it evidently possessed little knowledge of weather changes in the high Alps, or else did you beguile me out of my cosy room at 6 o'clock on a frosty morning to regale me with stale jibes at my sex? Perish the thought, Miss Winton. My only intent was to explain that the ancient proverb maker, meaning to be rude, might have found a better simile. Meanwhile, I am so cold that the only mood left in my composition is one of impatience to be moving. Well, I am ready. But where is our guide? He has gone on in front with the porter. Porter, what is the man carrying? The wherewithal to refresh ourselves when we reach the hut. Oh, said Helen, I had no idea that mountaineering was such a business. I thought the essentials were a packet of sandwiches and a flask. You will please not be flippant. Climbing is serious work, and you must moderate your pace. If you walk at that rate from here to Forno, you will be very, very ill before you reach the hut. Ill? How absurd! Not only absurd, but disagreeable, far worse than crossing the Channel. Even old hands like me are not free from mountain sickness, though it seizes us at higher altitudes than we shall reach today. In the case of a novice, anything in the nature of hurrying during the outward journey is an unfailing factor. They were crossing the golf links, and the smooth path was tempting to a good walker. Helen smiled as she accommodated herself to Bauer's slower stride. Though the man might possess experience, the woman had the advantage of youth, the unattainable, and this wonderful hour after dawn was stirring its ichor in her veins. I suppose that is what Stamper meant when he took slow and sure for his motto, she said. Stamper? Who is Stamper? There was a sudden rasp of iron in his voice, as a rule Bauer spoke with a cultivated languor that almost veiled the staccato accents of the man of affairs. Helen was so surprised by this unwarranted clang of anger that she looked at him with wide open eyes. He is the driver I told you of, the man who took the wheel off my carriage during the journey from St. Moritz, she explained. Oh, of course, how stupid of me to forget. But, by the way, did you mention his name? No, I think not. Someone interrupted me. Mr. Dunstan came and spoke to you. He laughed gaily and drew in deep breaths of the keen air. He was carrying his ice axe over his left shoulder. With his right hand he brushed away a disturbing thought. By Jove, yes. Dunstan dragged me off to open a bank at Baccarat, and you will be glad to hear that I won £500. I am glad you won, but who lost so much money? Dunstan dropped the greater part of it. Your American friend, Mr. Spencer, was rather inclined to brag of his prowess in that direction, it appears. He even went so far as to announce his willingness to play for 4 figures, but he backed out of it. Do you mean that Mr. Spencer wanted to stake £1,000 on a single game at cards? Evidently he did not want to do it, but he talked about it. Yet he impressed me as being a very clear-headed and sensible young man, said Helen decisively. Here, young lady, I must call you to account. In what category do you place me, then? Oh, you are different. I disapprove of anyone playing for such high stakes, but I suppose you are used to it and can afford it, whereas a man who has his way to make in the world would be exceedingly foolish to do such a thing. Pray, how did you come to measure the extent of Spencer's finances? Dear me. Did I say that? I am sorry. Of course, I had no wish to speak offensively. What I mean is that he may be quite as well able to run a big bank at Baccarat as I am. He was telling me yesterday of his early struggles to gain a footing in some mining community in Colorado, and the impression his words left on me was that he is still far from wealthy, that is, as one understands the term. Here we are at the footpath. Shall we follow it and scramble up out of the ravine, or do you prefer the carriage road? The footpath, please. And before we drop the subject of cards, which is unquestionably out of place on a morning like this, let me say that perhaps I have done the American an injustice. Dunstan is given to exaggeration. He has so little control over his face that it is rank robbery to bet with him. Such a man is apt to run to extremes. It may be that Spencer was only talking through his hat, as they say in New York. Helen had the best of reasons for rejecting this version of the story. Her perceptive faculties, always well developed, were strung to high tension in Maloja. The social pinpricks inflicted there had rendered her more alert, more cautious than was her wont. She was quite sure, for instance, judging from a number of slight indications, that Spencer was deliberately avoiding any opportunity of making Bowers' acquaintance. More than once, when an introduction seemed to be imminent, the American effaced himself. Other men in the hotel were not like that. They rather sought the great man's company. She wondered if Bower had noticed it. Despite his candid, almost generous, disclaimer of motive, there was an undercurrent of hostility in his words that suggested a feeling of pique. She climbed the rocky path in silence until Bower spoke again. "How do the boots go?" he asked. "Splendidly, thanks. It was exceedingly kind of you to take such trouble about them. I had no idea one had to wear such heavy nails, and that tip of yours about the extra stockings is excellent. You will acknowledge the benefit most during the descent. I have known people become absolutely lame on the home journey through wearing boots only just large enough for ordinary walking. As for the clamping of the nails over the edges of the soles, the sharp stones render that imperative. When you have crossed a moraine or two, and a peculiarly nasty girole that exists beyond the hut, if we have time to make an easy ascent, you will understand the need of extra strong footwear." Helen favoured him with a shy smile. "Long hours of reading have revealed the nature of a moraine," she said. "But please, what is a girole?" "A slope of loose stones. Let me see, what do they call it in Scotland and Cumberland?" "Ah, yes, a scree. On the French side of the Alps the same thing is known as a casse." "How well you know this country and its ways. Have you climbed many of the well-known peaks?" "Some years ago I scored my century beyond 12,000 feet. That is pretty fair for an amateur." "Have you done the Matterhorn?" "Yes, 4 times. Once I followed Tyndall's example and converted the summit into a pass between Switzerland and Italy." "How delightful. I suppose you have met many of the famous guides?" He laughed pleasantly. "One does not attempt the Cervin or the Jungfrau without the best men, and in my time there were not 20, all told. I had a long talk with our present guide last night and found I had used many a track he had only seen from the valley." Then a loud toot on a cow horn close at hand interrupted her. The artist was a small boy. He appeared to be waiting expectantly on a hillock for someone who came not. "Is that a signal?" she asked. "Yes. He is a gormer, or cowherd, another word for your alpine vocabulary. The burgher whose cattle he will drive to the pasture has probably arranged to meet him here." Bower was always an interesting and well-informed companion. Launched now into a congenial topic, he gave Helen a thoroughly entertaining lecture on the customs of a Swiss commune. He pointed out the successive tiers of pastures, told her their names and seasons of use, and even hummed some verses of the cow songs, or Kurayan, which the men sing to the cattle, addressing each animal by name. An hour passed pleasantly in this manner. Their guide, a man named Joseph Barth, and the porter, who answered to Karl, awaited them at the milk chalet by the side of Lake Cavloccio. Bower, evidently accustomed to the leadership of expeditions of this sort, tested their ice axes and examined the ropes slung to Barth's rucksack. "The Forno is a glacier deluxe," he explained to Helen. "But it is always advisable to make sure that your appliances are in good order. That pickle you are carrying was made by the best blacksmith in Grindelwald, and you can depend on its soundness. But these men are so familiar with their surroundings that they often provide themselves with frayed ropes and damaged axes. In addition to my boots, therefore, I am indebted to you for a special brand of ice axe," she cried. "Your gratitude now is as nothing to the ecstasy you will display when Karl unpacks his load," he answered lightly. "Now, Miss Winton, en route. You know the path to the glacier already, don't you?" "I have been to its foot twice." "Then you go in front. There is no room to walk 2 abreast. Before we tackle the ice, we will call a halt for refreshments." From that point till the glacier was reached, the climb was laboriously simple. There was no difficulty and not the slightest risk, even for a child. but the heavy gradient and the rarefied air made it almost impossible to sustain a conversation unless the speakers dawdled. Helen often found herself many yards in advance of the others. She simply could not help breasting the steeper portions of the track. She was drawn forward by an intense eagerness to begin the real business of the day. Bauer did not seek to restrain her. He thought her high spirits admirable, and his gaze dwelt appreciatively on her graceful poise as she stopped on the crest of some small ravine and looked back at the plodders beneath. Attractive at all times, she was bewitching that morning to a man who prided himself on his athletic tastes. She wore a white knitted jersey and a short skirt, a costume seemingly devised to reveal the lines of a slender waist and supple limbs. A white tam o' shanter was tied firmly over her glossy brown hair with a silk motor veil, and the stout boots which she had surveyed so ruefully when Bauer brought them to her on the previous evening after interviewing the village shoemaker were by no means so cumbrous in use as her unaccustomed eyes had deemed them. Even the phlegmatic guide was stirred to gruff appreciation when he saw her vault onto a large flat boulder in order to examine an iron cross that surmounted it. "Ach Gott," he grunted, "that English woman is as sure-footed as a chamois." But Helen had found a name and a date on a triangular strip of metal attached to the cross. "Why has this memorial been placed here?" she asked. Bauer appealed to Barth, but he shook his head. Karl gave details. "A man fell on the Cima del Lago. They carried him here, and he died on that rock. Poor fellow." Some of the joyous light left Helen's face. She had passed the cross before and had regarded it as one of the votive offerings so common by the wayside in Catholic countries, knowing that in this part of Switzerland the Italian element predominated among the peasants. "We get a fine view of the Cima del Lago from the cabane," said Bauer unconcernedly. Helen picked a little blue flower that nestled at the base of the rock. She pinned it to her jersey without comment. Sometimes the callousness of a man was helpful, and the shadow of a bygone tragedy was out of keeping with the glow of this delightful valley. The curving mass of the glacier was now clearly visible. It looked like some marble staircase meant to be trodden only by immortals. Ever broadening and ascending until it filled the whole width of the rift between the hills, it seemed to mount upward to infinity. The sidelong rays of the sun, peeping over the shoulders of Forno and Rosegg, tinted the great ice river with a sapphire blue, while its higher reaches glistened as though studded with gigantic diamonds. Near at hand, where the Orlegna rushed noisily from thraldom, the broken surface was sombre and repellent. In colour, a dull grey, owing to the accumulation of winter debris and summer dust, it had the aspect of decay and death. It was jagged and gaunt and haggard. The far-flung piles of the white moraine imposed a stony barrier against its farther progress. But that unpleasing glimpse of disruption was quickly dispelled by the magnificent volume and virgin purity of the glacier as a whole. Helen tried to imagine herself 2 miles distant, a tiny speck on the great floor of the pass. That was the only way to grasp its stupendous size, though she knew that it mounted through 5 miles of rock-strewn ravine before it touched the precipitous saddle along which runs the borderline between Italy and Switzerland. Karl's sigh of relief, as he deposited his heavy load on a table-like boulder, brought Helen back from the land of dreams. To this sturdy peasant, the wondrous Forno merely represented a day's hard work, at an agreed sum of 10 francs for carrying nearly half a hundredweight, and a liberal pourboire if the voyageurs were satisfied. Sandwiches and a glass of wine, diluted with water brought by the guide from a neighbouring rill, glacier water being used only as a last resource, were delectable after a steady 2 hours' walk. The early morning meal of coffee and a roll had lost some of its flavour when consumed apparently in the middle of the night, and Helen was ready now for her breakfast. While they were eating, Bauer and Joseph Barth cast glances at some wisps of cloud drifting slowly over the crests of the southern hills. Nothing was said. The guide read his patron's wishes correctly. Unless some cause far more imperative than a slight mist intervened, the day's programme must not be abandoned, so there was no loitering. The sun was almost in the valley, and the glacier must be crossed before the work of the night's frost was undone. When they stepped from the moraine onto the ice bath led, Helen followed. Bauer came next, with Karl in the rear. If it had not been for the crisp crunching sound of the hobnails amid the loose fragments on the surface, and the ring of the pickle's steel-shod butt on the solid mass beneath, Helen might have fancied that she was walking up an easy rock-covered slope. Any delusion on that point, however, was promptly dispelled by a glimpse of a narrow crevasse that split the foot of the glacier lengthwise. She peered into its sea-green depths awesomely. It resembled a toothless mouth gaping slowly open, ready enough to swallow her, but too inert to put forth the necessary effort. And the thought reminded her of something. She halted and turned to Bauer. "Ought we not to be roped?" she asked. He laughed with the quiet confidence of the expert mountaineer. "Why?" he cried. "The way is clear. One does not walk into a crevasse with one's eyes open. But Stamper told me that I should refuse to advance a yard on ice or difficult rock without being roped." "Stamper, your cab driver?" There was no reason that she could fathom why her elderly friend's name should be repeated with such scornful emphasis. "Ah, yes. He is that because he is lame," she protested. "But he was one of the most famous guides in Zermatt years ago." She swung round and appealed to Barth, who was wondering why his employers were stopping before they had climbed 20 feet. "Are you from Zermatt?" she demanded. "No, Fräulein. From Pontresina. Zermatt is a long way from here." "But you know some of the Zermatt men, I suppose? Have you ever heard of Christian Stamper?" "Most certainly, Fräulein. My father helped him to build the first hut on the Hohenli Ridge." "Old Stamper," chimed in Karl from beneath. "It will be long ere he is forgotten. I was one of 4 who carried him down from Korvatch to Sils, Maria the day after he fell. He was making the descent by night, a mad thing to do, and there was murder in his heart, they said. But I never believed it. We shared a bottle of Montepulciano only yesterday, just for the sake of old times, and he was as merry as Hans von Rippach himself." Bauer was stooping, so Helen could not see his face. He seemed to be fumbling with a bootlace. "You hear, Mr. Bauer," she cried. "I am quoting no mean authority." He did not answer. He had untied the lace and was readjusting it. The girl realized that to a man of his portly build his present attitude was not conducive to speech. It had an additional effect, which did not suggest itself to her. The effort thus demanded from heart and lungs might bring back the blood to a face blanched by a deadly fear. Karl was stopped with reminiscences of Stamper. "I remember the time when people said Christian was the best man in the Bernina," he said. He would never go back to the Valais after his daughter died. It was a strange thing that he should come to grief on a cowherd's track like that over Korvatch, but Etta's affair— "Schweige!" snarled Bauer, straightening himself suddenly. His dark eyes shot such a gleam of lambent fury at the porter that the man's jaw fell. The words were frozen on his lips. He could not have been stricken, dumb more effectually had he come face to face with one of the horrific sprites described in the folklore of the hills. Helen was surprised. What had poor Karl done that he should be bidden so fiercely to hold his tongue? Then she thought that Bauer must have recalled Stamper's history, and feared that perhaps the outspoken peasant might enter into a piquant account of some village scandal. A chambermaid in the hotel, questioned about Stamper, had told her that the daughter he loved so greatly had committed suicide. Really, she ought to be grateful to her companion for saving her from a passing embarrassment, but she had the tact not to drop the subject too quickly. "If Barth and you agree that roping is unnecessary, of course I haven't a word to say in the matter," she volunteered. "It was rather absurd of me to mention it in the first instance." "No, you were right. I have never seen Stamper, but his name is familiar. It occurs in most Alpine records." "Barth, fix the rope before we go farther. The Fräulein wishes it." The rush of colour induced by physical effort of a tensity that Helen was wholly unaware of, was ebbing now before a numbing terror that had come to stay. His face was drawn and livid. His voice had the metallic ring in it that the girl had detected once already that day. Again she experienced a sense of bewilderment that he should regard a trivial thing so seriously. She was not a child. The world of today pulsated with far too many stories of tragic passion, that she should be shielded so determinedly from any hint of an episode that doubtless wrung the heart's core of this quiet valley one day in August 16 years ago. In some slight degree Bauer's paroxysm of anger was a reflection on her own good taste, for she had unwittingly given rise to it. Nevertheless, she felt indebted to him. To extricate both Bauer and herself from an awkward situation, she took a keen interest in Barth's method of adjusting the rope. The man did not show any amazement at Bauer's order. He was there to earn his fee. Had these mad English told him to cut steps up the gentle slope in front, he would have obeyed without protest, though it was more than strange that this much-travelled voyager should adopt such a needless precaution. As a matter of fact, under Barth's guidance, a blind cripple could have surmounted the first kilometre of the Forno glacier. The track lay close to the left bank of the moraine. It curved slightly to the right, and soon the exquisite panorama of Monte Rosec, the Cima di Rosso, Monte Sissone, Piz-Tirone, and the Castello group opened up before the climbers. Helen was enchanted. Twice she half-turned to address some question to Bauer, but on each occasion she happened to catch him in the act of swallowing some brandy from a flask. Governed by an unaccountable timidity, she pretended not to notice his actions and diverted her words to Barth, who told her the names of the peaks and pointed to the junctions of minor ice fields with the main artery of the Forno. Bauer did not utter a syllable until they struck out toward the center of the glacier. A crevasse some 10 feet in width and seemingly hundreds of feet deep barred the way, but a bridge of ice covered with snow offered safe transit. The snow carpet showed that a number of climbers had passed quite recently in both directions. Even Helen, somewhat awed by the dimensions of the rift, understood that the existence of this natural arch was as well recognized by alpinists as Waterloo Bridge is known to dwellers on the south side of the Thames. "Now, Miss Winton, you should experience your first real thrill," said Bauer. "This bridge forms here every year at this season, and an army might cross in safety. It is the genuine article, the first and strongest of a series. Yet here you cross the Rubicon. A mixture of metaphors is allowable in high altitudes, you know." Helen, almost startled at first by the unaffected naturalness of his words, was unfeignedly relieved at finding him restored to the normal. Usually his supply of light-hearted badinage was unceasing. He knew exactly when and how to season it with more serious statements. It is this rare quality that makes tolerable a long day's solitude a doe. "I am not Caesar's wife," she replied. "But for the credit of womankind in general, I shall act as though I was above suspicion of nervousness." She did not look round. Barth was moving quickly, and she had no desire to burden him with a drag on the rope. When she was in the centre of the narrow causeway, a snow cornice in the lip of the crevasse detached itself under the growing heat of the sun and shivered down into the green darkness. The incident brought her heart into her mouth. It served as a reminder that this solid ice river was really in a state of constant change and movement. Bauer laughed, with all his customary gaiety of manner. "That came at a dramatic moment," he said. "Too bad it could not let you pass without giving you a quake. I am not a bit afraid. Ah, but I can read your thoughts. There is a bond of sympathy between us. Hemp is a non-conductor." "You are willfully misunderstanding me," he retorted. "No, I honestly believed you felt the rope quiver a little. Alas, it is the atmosphere. My compliments fall on idle ears." Barth interrupted this play of harmless chaff by jerking some remark over his shoulder. "Looks like a gux," he said gruffly. "Nonsense," said Bauer. "A bank of mist. The sun will soon melt it." "It's a gux, right enough," chimed in Karl, who had recovered his power of speech. "That is why the boy was blowing his horn, to show he was bringing the cattle home. Well then, push on. The sooner we are in the hut, the better." "Please, what is a gux?" asked Helen, when the men had nothing more to say. "A word I would have wished to add later to your Alpine phrase book. It means a storm, a blizzard. Should we not return at once in that event?" "What? Who said just now she was not afraid? But a storm in such a place. These fellows smell a torment in every little cloud from the southwest. We may have some wind and a light snowfall, and that will be an experience for you. Surely you can trust me not to run any real risk." "Oh, yes. I do indeed, but I have read of people being caught in these storms and suffering terribly. Not on the Forno, I assure you. I don't wish to minimize the perils of your first ascent, but it is only fair to say that this is an exhibition glacier. If it was near a town, you would find an orchestra in each amphitheatre up there, with sideshows in every couloir. Jesting apart, you are absolutely safe with Barth and me, not to mention the irrepressible gentleman who carries our provisions." Helen was fully alive to the fact that a woman who joins a mountaineering party should not impose her personal doubts on men who are willing to go on. She flourished her ice axe bravely and cried, "Excelsior!" In the next instant she regretted her choice of expression. The moral of Longfellow's poem might be admirable, but the fate of its hero was unpleasantly topical. Again Bauer laughed. "Ah," he said, "will you deny now that I am a first-rate receiver of wireless messages?" And she had no breath left for a quip. Barth was hurrying, and the thin air was beginning to have its effect. When an unusually smooth stretch of ice permitted her to take her eyes from the track for a moment, she looked back to learn the cause of such haste. To her complete astonishment, the Maloja Pass and the hills beyond it were dissolved in a thick mist. A monstrous cloud was sweeping up the Orlegna Valley. As yet, it was making for the Muretto Pass, rather than the actual ravine of the Forno, but a few wraiths of vapour were sailing high overhead, and it needed no weather-wise native to predict that ere long the glacier itself would be covered by that white pall. She glanced at Bauer. He smiled cheerfully. "It is nothing," he murmured. "I really don't care," she said. "One does not shirk an adventure merely because it is disagreeable. The pity is that all this lovely sunshine must vanish. It will reappear. You will be charmed with the novelty in an hour or less. Is it far to the hut?" "Hardly 20 minutes at our present pace." A growl from Bath stopped their brief talk. Another huge crevasse yawned in front. There was an ice bridge, with snow, like others they had crossed, but this was a slender structure, and the leader stabbed it viciously with the butt of his axe before he ventured on it. The others kept the rope taut, and he crossed safely. They followed. As Helen gained the further side, she heard Bowers chuckle. "Another thrill." "I am growing quite used to them," she said. "Well, it may help somewhat if I tell you that the temporary departure of the sun will cause this particular bridge to be 10 times as strong when we return." "Attention!" cried Bath, taking a sharp turn to the left. The meaning of his warning was soon apparent. They had to descend a few feet of rough ice, and Helen found, to her great relief it must be confessed, that they were approaching the lateral moraine. Already the sky was overcast. The glacier had taken to itself a cold greyness that was disconcerting. The heavy mist fell on them with inconceivable rapidity. Shining peaks and towering precipices of naked rock were swept out of sight each instant. The weather had changed with a magical speed. The mist advanced with the rush of an express train, and a strong wind sprang up as though it had burst through a restraining wall and was bent on overwhelming the daring mortals who were penetrating its chosen territory. Somehow, anyhow, Helen scrambled on. She was obliged to keep eyes and mind intent on each step. Her chief object was to imitate Bath, to poise and jump and clamber with feet and hands exactly as he did. At this stage the rope was obviously a hindrance, but none of the men suggested its removal, and Helen had enough to occupy her wits without troubling them by a question. Even in the stress of her own breathless exertions, she had room in her mind for a wondering pity for the heavily laden Carl. She marvelled that anyone, be he strong as Samson, could carry such a load and not fall under it. Yet he was lumbering along behind Bauer with a clumsy agility that was almost supernatural to her thinking. She was still unconscious of the fact that most of her own struggles were due more to the rarefied air than to the real difficulties of the route. At last, when she really thought she must cry out for a rest, when a steeper climb than any hitherto encountered had bereft her almost of the power to take another upward spring to the ledge of some enormous boulder, when her knees and ankles were sore and bruised, and the skin of her fingers was beginning to fray under her stout gloves, she found herself standing on a comparatively level space formed of broken stones. A rough wall, surmounted by a flat pitched roof, stared at her out of the mist. In the centre of the wall a small, square, shuttered window suggested a habitation. Her head swam, and her eyes ached dreadfully, but she knew that this was the hut, and strove desperately to appear self-possessed. "Accept my congratulations, Miss Winton," said a low voice at her ear. "Not one woman in 1,000 would have gone through that last half-hour without a murmur. You are no longer a novice. Allow me to present you with the freedom of the Alps. This is one of the many chateaux at your disposal." A wild swirl of sleet lashed them venomously. This first whip of the gale seemed to have the spitefulness of disappointed rage. Helen felt her arm grasped. Bauer led her to a doorway cunningly disposed out of the path of the dreaded southwest wind. At that instant all the woman in her recognized that the man was big and strong and self-reliant, and that it was good to have him near, shouting reassuring words that were whirled across the rock-crowned glacier by the violence of the tempest.